Hi, this is Jacqueline Simon. I'm here with Dr. Harold R. Mayberry at the First African Methodist Episcopal Church in Oakland on Telegraph and 37th. And today's date is February 21st, 2012. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with, where were you born?
I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, Midwest part of the country, an exciting city at that time.
I bet. Where were your parents born?
My mother was born in St. Louis. My father was born in St. Louis.
Oh.
But my mother's parents were born in Illinois. My father's parents were born in Texas. Right, so we've got a little Midwest and Southern blood flowing through us.
Did your parents go to college?
My mother did. My mother finished a AA degree. My father did not.
And where did you go to college?
Wilberforce University, the oldest African American university operated by people of color in this country, owned and operated by the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Finished there and went to Payne Theological Seminary. Finished there and went to Harrington Seminary.
Where are those?
Wilberforce is in Ohio, in the community of Xenia, about 16 miles from Xenia. Payne Seminary and Wilberforce are on the same campus, and Harrington is in Indiana.
Great. When did you graduate?
I graduated from Wilberforce in '71. I was in Payne from '71 through '73, and then in Harrington later on, '83.
So, I think you might have been old enough to be involved in the civil rights movement. Were you involved?
A little bit. I had the pleasure of pastoring in the South. Lived in Clarksdale, Mississippi, which is the deep rural South. I lived in Greenville, Mississippi, which is more urban. And then I pastored in New Orleans, Louisiana. I pastored in Clarksdale late 70s. And that was when I had an opportunity to really understand the importance of the civil rights movement.
Were your parents involved in the civil rights movement?
No, my parents were not, though. Right.
I saw that on your website, you were on the New Orleans School Board.
Oh, yeah.
What were some of the issues that you worked on?
When I was in the New Orleans School Board, we were dealing with issues like charter schools, which was becoming a hot issue at that time. We were dealing with the fact that most of the schools in New Orleans at that period of time needed renovation. There was never enough money for the renovation. So the schools in my district were some of the more newer schools, so to speak. But all of the schools in that city at that time needed renovation and with a lot of disrepair.
Yes. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had very specific techniques. Would you say those were techniques that you believe in your political action?
Oh, without a doubt. I think, for example, one of the techniques that Dr. King taught people in the movement was self-control, which led to nonviolence. As people were, in many instances, pushed to the edge, Dr. King's training taught them the importance of connecting scripture to real life, which allowed them to be able to move through the movement without being violent.
Malcolm X had a very different point of view.
Yeah.
Do you have an opinion about that?
Without a doubt. Because if you look at Malcolm's initial input in the movement, Malcolm was very radical, and as King was radical. They just had different kinds of the way they initiated their radical ideologies. But Malcolm later on adopted the philosophy that it was important for all people to work together. I think because of Malcolm's early training and some of the experiences Malcolm went through as a result of growing up in a segregated community, Malcolm was very emphatic about what it would take to get to turn things around. I don't necessarily subscribe to the philosophy that violence is necessary. I'm a firm believer if we can sit down, talk out our differences, reason through those things that separate us, we're able to then work together without violence being a part of our process.
How long have you been pastor of this church?
I've been pastor of this church,
This church.
for 16 years.
Yeah, so you're
16
here.
years.
How large is your congregation?
Congregation we have on roll about 2,800 people. Depending upon, in a month, we don't see 2,800 people, but we see over, in a month, about 1,200 in a month. So I think what happens in most African American churches, people come to a church, like it, stay for a season, and then disappear, and they don't tell us they've disappeared, so we don't take their name off the roll just in case they come back. But between our two services on Sunday morning, we see easy about 700 people between the two services.
That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Could you describe some characteristics of your congregation? Young, old? You have a Sunday school?
Oh yeah, we have Sunday school. I think that the average age of this congregation now is about 45. When I came here, it was more like 75. Over the 16 years, because of the congregation's involvement in the community, more younger people became attracted to what we were doing. Interestingly enough, most of the people who are members of this congregation do not live in Oakland. Most of them, at least 60%, commute from Antioch, American Canyon, Hayward, Richmond. Of those who do, of the percentage that live in Oakland, only about 10% live in this immediate area. Of those left, a high percentage come in from East Oakland, West Oakland, but not this immediately part of the city. But the congregation is made up of a diverse group of people. There are African Americans, there are people who are non-African American, there are people who are middle class, there are people who are not middle class. We don't have many 1%ers in the congregation, but we have a very diverse congregation.
Wonderful. Now, by my reading of the Chronicle article, it would seem that you were involved in politics here in Oakland. I also noticed that you sat on the Oakland Community Policing Advisory Commission. Would you say your congregation is political?
I would think we are more political than non-political, and I'll tell you why I say that. The vice mayor of the city is a member of this church. We have 2 sitting school board members who are members of this church. The new police chief is a member of this church. So I think, and we have several union leaders who are members of this congregation. I think we're more political than non-political because the congregation senses the need to be actively involved in change within this community. And so, for example, when we do things in the community, we're cautious to make sure we don't violate our 501c3 status, which means we can't be partial in terms of what we are participating in. But we certainly are actively involved in a number of areas that we believe will help to institute change in this community. So let me give you an example of something. While as a congregation we cannot endorse Vice Mayor Brooks when she runs, but individually we go out and stand on the corner and pass out flyers. Individually we go from door to door passing out literature. Individually on election day we stand with her and help try to generate the spirit of voting in the lives of people. So congregation, and that's a large percentage of this congregation that does those kind of things.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Mm-hmm.
You said that maybe 10% of your congregation is local.
In this immediate area.
In this immediate area.
Mm-hmm.
So do the people from out of town who are part of your congregation also involve themselves in the politics in this specific community, and why? Why do you think that is?
I think a couple of things. Most of the people, and I feel comfortable without fear of contradiction in saying this, most of the people who have moved out of the city have done so for economic reasons. Mm-hmm. They couldn't afford to live in Oakland anymore. Oakland has become a very expensive place to live. They can live cheaper in the American Canyons, the Antiochs, but they have not lost their connection to the city. And I think the link between them and the community is First AME Church. So we try to make sure that the church is actively involved in the kinds of things that are going to help bring about change in this community. That's why people keep coming here and ultimately are involved in what's going on in the city.
Occupy Wall Street started in September in New York.
Yes.
Is that when you became aware of it?
That's about the time I heard about it. I have to openly admit I did not think a whole lot about it then. Was interested, but not with great passion, and just continued to listen to what was going on. I didn't really become aware of the impact the movement could have on our country until Occupy Oakland was birthed. Then I knew that, and I started listening to what was going on with Occupy Oakland. I was convinced that Occupy Oakland, like Occupy Wall Street, could really prick the consciousness of the leadership of this community and this country.
So the first large march was in November at the Port of Oakland.
Right.
Did you participate?
No, I didn't.
Did you? Any of your congregants?
Only those who are members of the union. And there are some who are members of the union, and they did participate. That I would guess that was less than 2%. Yeah, because not many of them shared with me their participation in it, but some of them did.
I feel that outside of the civil rights movement, people of color have not always felt included in these kind of political actions. How do you see yourself and your congregation within this movement?
In November, Reverend Jamal Bryant, pastor of Empowerment Temple AME Church in Baltimore, Maryland, called me. Jamal is one of the young, up-and-coming on the scene activists of this country. He told me that he, Russell Simmons, the hip-hop, and Ben Chavis, former NAACP national president, talked about the Occupy Wall Street movement and tried to identify why there was so much disconnect within the movement. They met with David DeGroot, who is one of the leaders of Occupy Wall Street, and discovered that the real issues seemed to be there was no leadership. Whenever there's no leadership in a movement, the movement's not going anywhere. There's chaos, there's confusion, so there was a disconnect. Two, David DeGroot helped them understand that when there was no defined goals for Occupy Wall Street. They just wanted change, but nobody talked about specifically what that looked like. And so from those discussions was birthed the Occupy the Dream movement. Occupy the Dream is a partnership with the Occupy movement. And Occupy the Dream is primarily comprised of faith leaders. The reason faith leaders are involved is because every significant change in the life of this country over the past 50 or so years has had the involvement of the black church in it. As a result of the black church being involved in movements, the faith community as a whole became involved in movements. If you look at the civil rights movement, when Dr. King became involved in the movement, they started expanding their reach, and they brought in rabbis, priests from various parts of the country who joined the movement because they saw the movement as having a real purpose. So we sat down, Ben Chavis, Russell Simmons, Jamal Bryant, some of us sat down and talked about regionally what that could look like. And David DeGroot from Occupy Wall Street committed to us that he was going to do everything he could to connect the church with the Occupy movements across the country. One of the things a lot of people don't know and probably don't even appreciate because they don't know it, most of the Occupy movements across the country are connected. A lot of people think there's a lot of disconnect, and there is. But the Occupy Wall Street people and the Occupy Oakland people are in communication every week, almost every day. Occupy LA and Occupy Wall Street are in communication regularly. Occupy Baltimore, Occupy Washington, Wall Street are in communication regularly. So what we attempted to do was not put the faith community in front of the Occupy movement, but to put them next to the Occupy movement to help bring organization, structure, and goals to the movement. So therefore, the Dream / Occupy movement was able to say to Wall Street, these will some of the kinds of things we want, i.e., we want an immediate strengthening of the Pell Grant program. Young people across this country want to go to school, but cannot afford to. It's been interesting to hear the leadership of the country recently talk about the fact that universities and colleges are about to tuition our people out of the process. Mm-hmm. And so we've got to institute a program that will allow people who really want to go to school to be able to do so. Pell Grant program. 2, what we've suggested people ought to work toward, go to school, get a job, and work toward is the American dream of home ownership. But over the past several years, we've seen that that's just not working anymore. You've got people who had a house, lost the house, are homeless now. You have people who all their life dreamed of owning a house, invested in that dream, lost the house. And so Occupy the Dream is urging an immediate moratorium on all foreclosures in America. Give people a chance to catch up. The truth of the matter is, Wall Street's made their money. They made it over and over again on loans that they should not have made, on foreclosures. They made money, And the other piece of that is where they've not made money on some foreclosures, you've got vacant houses in our communities, which are certainly not what our community wants nor needs. So Occupy the Dream is saying, let's have an immediate moratorium on all foreclosures in America. Let's let people catch up. 3, people from the war, veterans, are about to come back to this country, back to Oakland, back to D.C., back with no jobs for them, many of whom have no training beyond the military training they received. Where are they going to work? What are they going to do? We're suggesting that Wall Street invest $100 billion, and I'm saying just the figure, I'm saying $100 billion, which is lunch money for Wall Street, into job training and job creation. Suppose the Chase banks, the City banks, the B of A's, the Wells Fargos came together and said, we're going to put a pot of money together, not in the hands of Occupy the Dream, we're going to put a pot of money together to ensure that there's job training, not just for the veterans, but for people in America who want to work. Mm-hmm. We're going to then create jobs for people who really want to work. You turn things around. Mm-hmm. So that's where we are. And that's why I think Occupy the Dream and the Occupy movement have found common ground. To specifically address your question, African American people did not see themselves represented / a part of the Occupy movement, which is why you began to have so many splinter groups, where people feel isolated, left out, forgotten, ignored, or where people don't understand where you're going They just don't become involved. And so as a result of that, we're saying that the Occupy movement has to be for everybody, not just people of color. It has to be for everybody. And our goal is to make sure that through the faith community, we involve anybody and everybody who wants to be involved in the movement.
There has been criticism about Occupy that it has no message.
Mm-hmm.
So do you agree with this criticism?
I agree that that was the case. I do not agree that that is the case. Even in Oakland, I've had a chance since I've become involved with Occupy the Dream to sit down with a number of people in the Occupy movement. They agree. They really didn't have a message. They know what they want on a broad scale. They can't tell you specifically what that means. For example, they want the banks to do something. What's that mean? They want City Hall to do something. What's that mean? And so we think that structure is now being brought to some extent to the movement, because I don't want to paint a rosy picture that's not real. There are many people, in the Occupy movement that don't trust the faith community. There's some suspicion as to what the underlying motives of the faith community could be. There's some suspicion in some circles about whether or not the faith community is really authentic in its desire to be involved in the movement. A person from Occupy Oakland said to me that some people asked them, is the faith community, i.e. the African American church, involved because we're trying to usurp the movement to move people closer to November when Mr. Obama runs again, which is really that's ridiculous. I wouldn't even respond to that. That's ridiculous. I think the suspicion is because most of the people who are involved in the Occupy movement have had no relationship with the faith community. And when there's been no relationship previously and somebody comes to the table, you sometimes wonder, what are they here for? What do they really want? So what we did something here, not this past Sunday, Sunday before last, to try to break the ice. Not just for the Occupy Oakland people, but for the people in this church. We had what was called, We Are the 99% Sunday. What we did at our 11 o'clock service, I invited people from Occupy Oakland to come and talk about why they're involved. I did it so that this congregation could understand that the people in the Occupy movement are just like the people who's sitting here on Sunday morning. Two of the people, and I didn't even know this, we had 3 speakers. 2 of the speakers were teachers. We have a number of teachers here. One is a community activist, I think trained in the Rainbow Push Coalition organization. The point is that all 3 of them have the same passion and have had the same kinds of experiences as people who sit here every Sunday morning. So I felt it was important for both groups to see both groups. And afterward, members of this congregation stood in line not only to shake the hands of those persons, but to ask where they could be involved in various aspects of the movement.
Now, the media shows a lot of violence in these protests.
Yeah.
When there is violence, does that affect your opinion of Occupy?
Not of Occupy. I don't believe, and I've said this to my council member, who's a member here, I don't believe a majority of the people involved in the violence are from Oakland. But I do believe that there are people who come from outside this area who have uncontrollable passion and undisciplined passion, that they do some things that are not positive. It doesn't sway me because I don't think that the acts of violence represent the Occupy movement. But I'm also sensitive to the fact that when people are ignored, when people are continuously pushed to the back, when people are frustrated and feel that nobody cares, things will happen. I don't encourage it. I don't like it, but I understand it. And so one of the things that, one of the goals we have is to help people understand there's just a different way to do it. I don't share the thinking of some of the Occupy people that nobody at City Hall cares. There are some people I don't think care. Quite frankly, I'm not going to say it on tape, but there are some people I don't think, my wife works for City Hall, so but there's some people I don't think do care. I think those who don't care are in a minority in City Hall. I think the majority of the people in city government, in this city, do care.
That kind of segues into my next question, which is, Oakland has many problems right now. Mm-hmm. Do you think Occupy helps or hurts?
I think Occupy does both. I'm going to tell you why. When those persons who decide to do it in to call attention to the movement in a violent manner do so, it hurts the city. It depletes resources that the city does not have. I'm thoroughly convinced the city doesn't have them. I'm not going into why they don't have them. I just don't think we have them, and that causes the city to have to find money it really needs to be putting in other places. On the other hand, I think that the Occupy movement has been very helpful in calling attention to the fact that city government has to pay a little more attention to the 99%. The city council members I know, love, and work with are part of the 99%. They're not part of the 1%. I think there are some 1%ers down there, but not those that I know. And so I think that all of us as people in this community have to have somebody that continues to hold our feet to the fire and help us continue to be sensitive to the fact that we are the 99. We are the 99%.
Now, there are many things wrong within our country right now. Is your concern centered on one particular aspect?
Honestly, two things really. Well, three things really. I'm very concerned about jobs right now. I'm very concerned. I've lived in cities, i.e. New Orleans, Oakland, where I've watched larger cities where I've watched what happens when people have no job to go to. I don't believe that all of the people in our community who are engaged in negative activity are doing so because they're just lazy and shiftless. I don't believe that. I believe that there are some people who are doing, there are some, not all, but there are some who are doing some things because they have to feed their families. I'm not condoning it, but I understand it. As a pastor, I understand it. As a pastor, I hear from people every week who at one point were doing very, very well. I just left a meeting, and as I was getting in my car, a member of this church approached me. She was a top real estate agent in this area. Her husband owned his own business in this area. She barely sells one house every 6 months. Well, she was doing far better than that in the day. Her husband's business has declined drastically. So I hear from people every week about how their life has changed, how their living situation has changed, and I understand the frustration and the anxiety that comes with that. Once again, I don't condone it. I don't support it, but I understand. I understand when people are looking at the children and they know that they have to feed their children, and they don't have a job anymore. I understand what that means. I hear it every week. So I'm very, very concerned about jobs in this country. I'm very concerned. Number two, I'm very concerned about the foreclosure piece. In this congregation, at one point, I would have said that this congregation in Oakland was one of the better congregations in terms of families being settled and stable in terms of their income, and I wouldn't say that today. So I've seen people who were doing very, very, very well 3 years ago who went into foreclosure within the past 3 months. And I'm not just talking about one or two families. I'm talking about 14, 15, 16. I'm very concerned about it. I'm extremely concerned about it. And I think that the country is going to have to put pressure on the big banks to address that issue. 3, I'm very concerned about schools in this country. I said that's one of my passions because I was on the school board, and but I watch in Oakland. I used to go to school board meetings, and certainly having 2 sitting school board members as members of this congregation, I pay attention to what's going on in the school system. I've got people in this congregation who are frustrated with our school board members who worship with them. All the school closures, the low performing schools, the fact that you bring in leadership at the superintendent's level who you believe is going to turn things around, and as our former mayor used to say, he doesn't have an S on his chest, so when it doesn't happen, the frustration only grows.
Just a second. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm really concerned nationwide about those issues.
So here's my last question.
Okay.
We're having the presidential elections in November. Do you see Occupy helping or hurting Obama's chances of re-election?
Here's what I believe. If Occupy is really serious about changing the direction of this country, we have to even hold President Obama's feet to the fire. I think that Occupy certainly can help. Here's why. If the president takes a close, hard look at the 99%, not suggesting he has not, if he does, I think he'll have to address the issues that Occupy is going to put on the table. Because I don't believe even yet all of the issues have been put on the table, like the foreclosures, the educational piece. I don't think all the issues have been put on the table yet. I think they will be. And I think we're going to see them put on the table probably midsummer to November. And I think if President Obama listens to those issues and does more than commit to helping to address them, but begins to address them, even with the kind of negativity that's happening in Congress, and even with that, if President Obama shows this nation he is really serious, he's sensitive and serious about addressing those problems, I think it's going to help him. If he does not, I think it's going to hurt him. I believe.
Thank you so much. Do you have? Oh, yes, and I guess this is not the last question.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
You got time?
So, just one more. There seems to be less in the news lately about Occupy. So, do you see a change in your congregation, and what's next?
We train the people at Fame to understand drama sells newspapers. That's what we train them. And so, I was I was involved in New Orleans in the PICO movement, Pacific Institute of Community Organizing, specifically All Congregations Together, which is an organization that operates around the Saul Alinsky principles of community organizing. Now, the reason I'm sharing that with you is because I'm of the opinion that as we move toward the election, it's going to be important for this community to understand how to organize. It's going to be important for this community to appreciate where we are and what we need to do to channel the energy of everybody in this community. Repeat the question again. I want to make sure I'm saying this the way I want to. I really want to say this.
I'm happy to do that. So it said about there was less news about Occupy.
Right.
Do you see changes in your congregation? Right. And then what was next?
The reason I dealt with that, the PICO piece, was because we were trained in community organizing that it's drama that sells papers. People don't really buy newspapers to hear good news. People buy newspapers to see what's going on, what's on the front page. And so we've taught our congregation not to be nervous that you don't hear a lot of things in the news. Because, isn't it interesting? I'll give you an example of something. SEIU, the union, had a rally at Everett Jones Barbecue. Asked me to come and be one of the speakers. All they were talking about was the need for them to become involved with the movement, what they can do to help the movement. Very positive. No media whatsoever. We're talking about over 200 people in there. No media whatsoever. However, you let something negative happen in the Occupy movement. Media come from everywhere. We had a press conference here in this church. Brought together faith leaders from across the city, about 15 of them. We talked about next steps for Occupy the Dream. One newspaper, one TV station. But you let something negative happen in Frank Ogawa Plaza, they'll come from everywhere. So news, that's what sells papers, drama. And you know, and so the people are not nervous about the fact they don't hear anything. They know we're going to hear something. For example, and we may not hear from the media, we'll hear it from each other. We did something that's a part of the Occupy the Dream movement on Valentine's Day. Occupy the Dream designated that day as Love Your Community Day, not just Love Your Sweetheart Day, Love Your Community Day. And in doing so, we identified minority-owned banks and credit unions. And we asked people to move $30. And why $30? A level that most people may be able to reach. $30 from a conventional bank to a credit union or minority-owned bank. You didn't hear anything about it in the newspaper. Mm-hmm. Newspaper didn't say anything because that's positive. You know, that shows initiative. And in this one congregation, just one congregation, we had 60-something people who moved over $8,000. One congregation. The media's not going to tell you that. Media is too connected to the places we move money from. They're not going to tell you that. So no, we're not disturbed about it at all. I was excited that the reporter from the Chronicle came out and did the article because we wanted the community to know Occupy the Dream is here. But I'm not surprised that people not going to come back. We are the 99% Sunday. There was no media here. No media, no TV, nothing like that because it was positive.
I respect the work that you're doing. It is wonderful.
Thank you. We're trying now. We are committed that we're going to stay with it. One of the things that discourages people is when you start in a movement and then you stop. Because people are ready to go. They're ready to do something. They're ready to see something happen. So we're not going to just start and stop. We're going to go all the way with this.
That was a wonderful concrete step that you took. Thank you so much, sir.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
This has been wonderful.
I hope this has been helpful to you.
I think so.
Okay.
Am I supposed to sign off? I'm sorry. Okay. This is Jacqueline Simon with Reverend Mayberry in Alaska, Quilcy. And we are done with our interview on February 21st, 2012. 2012. 2012. 2012.